Arabian Peninsula, including Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, United Arab Emirates, Dubai, Kuwait. They're all in there. And I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be in their interest to get the area under control and not end up as targets themselves.
And so who would you call on first to join in that military coalition?
Well, see, I think that's the wrong question. I know Chris Wallace was just focused on who's first, who's second, and who's third. That's silly, to be honest with you. What we really need to be talking about is the overall plan, the overall strategy, and not who's going to call first.
Dr. Carson, some of your Republican colleagues have suggested that when screening these refugees, we should figure out if they are Christian or Muslim. Obama is slamming this morning, saying there shouldn't be a religious test. Should there be a religious test?
Well, of course, we don't apply religious tests, but we should apply ideological tests. And I would be very reticent to bring in people who are ideologically opposed to the ideal of America.
Should the screening process be different for Christian Syrian refugees or Muslims?
As I said, religion, as far as I'm concerned, is not an adequate screening tool. Ideology is.
Dr. Carson, is there any situation that you would accept Syrian refugees in this country, that you would be comfortable accepting Syrian refugees? Is there any program in place or any plan that you have in mind?
I don't see anything right now that allows us to adequately vet these people. If somebody can come up with something that shows an adequate vetting process, I would be willing to consider that.
Is there any historical model for that you think has worked in the past?
I don't know of any. Not in this situation, but of course this is a relatively unique situation for our country. I don't think we've been in this situation before.
And could you clarify, you talked about the Chinese being in Syria in the debate, and you said that those remarks were misinterpreted. What's the basis for your information on that, and who has been advising you on that front?
The Syrians have sophisticated Chinese weaponry. That's the basis of it. And that sophisticated Chinese weaponry requires support in order to utilize it.
And where are you getting that information from? Who's been advising you on that matter?
My advisors. I have advisors who are former military people and advisors who are former CIA people.
But you don't have any reason to believe that the Chinese, any people are on the ground fighting. You just were.
Well, I never said that there were.
Right. No, I understand that. But you're saying that it's just weaponry was what you were referring to.
Right. They're involved. And we have asked them not to, but they have not heeded that.
What's your concern on that front, that they are involved, as you say, the Chinese?
Well, the concern being that it would be very easy to draw them in further, and we have to be very careful in a situation like that.
Dr. Carson, yesterday in your speech you accused the Obama administration of turning its back on American allies. What would a policy of refusing refugees say to those like Germany, which are receiving refugees?
My point being that I was in Israel within the last year, couldn't find a single person who didn't feel we had turned our backs on them. You look at the Ukraine, their willingness to give up their nuclear capabilities was based upon some promises that we would protect them if they were invaded. They were invaded. Did we protect them? No. Did we even give them offensive weapons? No. Do people look at the way we treat these people who are supposed to be our friends? And do they learn from that? Of course they do. And that puts us in a precarious situation when we are asking other people to do things based upon our word.
Dr. Carson, is there a number, do you have a number in mind that would make sense for the level of the number of American troops who should be in the region?
Yeah, as I said in the statement that I just read, that number would be what our military experts said that they needed.
Dr. Carson, you've called for obviously having the boots on the ground in Syria, but what happens after you put the boots on the ground after ISIS is defeated, what happens then?
Well, that would be a wonderful day, won't it? We'll celebrate. But that won't be the end of the celebration, obviously, because we have to make sure not only that they are defeated and eradicated, but that they don't come back. And when you think about how they were created in the first place, it was after we had won a very hard-fought victory in Iraq, and then we just vacated and left a big empty spot. I don't think that that is an appropriate way to do things.
So you're saying we should never vacate, that troops should be there for an extended period of time?
They don't necessarily have to be American troops. But remember, I also said that when we are leading in a way that evokes confidence in others, they will join us. And those forces will be able to be the residual forces. Not to mention the fact that you have to remember, not too many years ago, it was in 2009, there was quite a significant uprising in Iran, the Green Movement. Those people haven't all disappeared. And there are sentiments like that throughout the entire region. And those things need to be cultivated and developed. We have to fight a war not only physically, but ideologically.
Dr. Henderson, if you're president now, would you seek to invoke NATO Article 5?
I heard a lot of talk about that. I'm not sure.
You just declared, however, you just did say we're at war.
We are. They have declared war on us. Article 5 says if you do something that is seen as an attack on any member of NATO, to everybody obviously joins in. But the reason that I say that I'm a little hesitant is because I'm not 100% sure that just saying, I invoke Article 5 will change anything. I think it's really more what we do than what we say that is important.
Dr. Carson, in Obama's press conference today that you mentioned, he was taking aim at the GOP candidates, specifically you, he said, I want to see people present a specific plan. If they think they have advisors better than the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and advisors on the ground, I want to meet them. He was very blunt about it. How do you respond to that?
Well, as I said the other day, when I said we have better advisors, that was tongue-in-cheek. I hope we don't have better advisors than the president does. That would be very alarming if we did.
Dr. Carson, at last night's press conference, you were asked about President Obama's recent assessment of ISIS, and you said you don't like to be super critical and gave a fairly measured response to that. After hearing his press conference today in which the president said he has not underestimated the ISIS threat, do you have any other further comments on that? Would you like to reassess that? Well,
I was disappointed to hear that he didn't think that they had underestimated them. The first step in rectifying a problem is acknowledging that a problem exists. And if you think that everything you're doing is perfect and doesn't require modifications, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to do it. And that's a problem. I'm very hopeful that that is just the political talk and that that's not what he really believes, and that he does understand that they're not the JV, and that they are very sophisticated, and that they are capable of much more than we have been thinking, and that we are going to have to change our strategy, and that we are going to have to be much tougher, and that we must focus on eradicating them and not containing them. I sure hope he understands that.
Dr.
Can you clarify the steps that you would have taken President Obama has talked about containing the threat. In addition to what he has done, what are the additional steps that you would have taken to prevent what happened in Paris?
Well, the general principle that I've been talking about for several months is that if we don't fight them and eradicate them where they are, we will end up with situations like we have in Paris. we will end up with situations similar to that or even worse here in the United States of America. And I think we ought to take this as a warning that we need to really go in there with very serious intent, not to contain them, but to take them out completely, to destroy them, to eliminate them. I would use every resource available to us. I would use the world banking system to strangulate them in terms of currency. I would try to get rid of any revenues that they could derive from the oil and energy fields that they control. I would look at all the pathways of entrance and exit, like in Sinjar. They took control of the supply routes first, and that made the subsequent capture much easier. Those typical, old-fashioned, but very effective military strategies, they work. And you also have to recognize that you cannot fight a politically correct war. There will be collateral damage. And if your intention is to try to find a way not to have any collateral damage, you're not going to ever be very effective.
What kind of collateral damage are you talking about?
I'm talking about some people might say, well, you can't cut off the supply routes because there might be some people that you didn't intend to be strangulated who would be strangulated by that as well.
So you're not talking about casualties?
I'm not.
American casualties?
Well, there could be casualties. When we go in with airstrikes, are there going to be casualties? Absolutely. Do we try to minimize them? Of course we do. But we have to be realistic. We have to understand that we cannot fight a war in which we only, with pinprick precision, take out the bad guys. It doesn't work that way.
Dr. Carson, back to closing the border to Syrian immigrants, Syrian migrants. You said you don't have a religious test. You called it an ideological test. Paraphrasing something the President said earlier, doesn't that just feed the dark impulse within us?
It doesn't feed the dark impulse in me. What I'm talking about is when we look at some of the success that the global jihadist movement is having, a lot of it comes because of their very adept use of social media to spread their ideology to all parts of the world. And they've been very effective in doing that. That's something that we need to do also. And we have not countered them appropriately. Also, I believe that we need to put a lot more pressure on the clerics, the imams, to make a very distinct line between what ISIL, the radical Islamic jihadists are doing, and what traditional Islam is about. And if they're not willing to draw that line, we need to really point that out in a very major way.
Dr. Carson, what do you propose doing with the Syrian refugees already here in the United States?
Well, I would watch them very carefully, that's for sure. I would certainly stop any further ingress. Congress, I think, should defund all the programs that allow these people to be brought here immediately, today.
Watch them very closely. What do you mean by that?
Monitor them. Just like the Tsarnaev brothers were monitored, except you got to be able to pull the trigger.
Even if they had no criminal history, no?
I would monitor them very carefully, absolutely.
Is there any one piece of the administration's strategy that you think led to these attacks, one piece that fell apart, or one thing that could have prevented this attack? What do you see as the biggest flaw?
Again, I go back to the principles. Principle being, if you engage them where they are, and you engage them aggressively and very seriously, they're not going to have time to be somewhere else. They're going to have to be fighting for their lives where they are.
So you would have had a much larger force on the ground for how much time before now?
I would have treated them seriously. they would not have been the JV. I mean, if you want to go back to hypotheticals and what I would have done, you may remember a time about 3 years ago when there were only about 10,000 of them, and we knew exactly where they were in the desert. I would have wiped them out then.
Okay?
All right, thank you.